Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlot Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel. Today, I'm joined by my wormy little co-host, Tanner Dykstra, and today we're here to talk about Dune, Part 2. Mm-hmm. It's here, it's out. It took 3 years, which is actually pretty quick when you really think about it. Especially because it was supposed to come out last year. It was supposed to be 2 years.
That's true.
Tanner.
That's true.
But now we've seen it. We saw it early at a fan screening, but a lot of people saw it there. So
Yes.
the world is ablaze with Dune Part 2, and we're here to put our humble little hat.
Our little ember.
ring.
Yeah, our little ember to this fire.
Subscribe, like the channel, like the video,
you get it.
Comment. Yeah. Tanner.
Yeah?
We only have a limited amount of time to review Dune 2, and I want to squeeze every single millisecond.
That's true. We're on the clock.
No faffing. What do you think?
Tucker, I really enjoy the first Dune film, and this surpasses it in pretty much every conceivable way. I think that we are in agreement on.
I haven't talked yet.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's astounding, incredible, and the one word that really rung true in my mind as the film was wrapping up and as we were sort of walking out is that I've never really thought this of a film before Dune Part 2, is that it feels essential.
Okay.
It feels like essential sci-fi. It feels like essential blockbuster filmmaking.
Yeah.
And it is it's amazing on all counts. Now, I do have some things to say about it that could edge on criticism.
Uh-oh.
But we'll get there in due time.
And by my account, this is the first time that's happening.
The first time that's ever happened.
First criticism of Dune Part 2.
In human history.
Holy
that's
shit.
right. Yeah.
We're making history.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you for everyone for being here. Historic moment.
Yeah. But
potential hypothetical criticism.
Yeah, but I fucking love the movie.
Yeah. And Tanner?
Yeah.
I don't like Dune Part 1.
Yeah, that's right.
Or just Dune. There's no Part
Dune.
1. This isn't some Dead Reckoning horse shit.
No.
Or Wicked. But neither of those have that anymore.
Exactly.
I digress. I don't like that movie very much because I feel like it stays away from the character development that I felt is so interesting in Dune, and focuses more on spectacle and vibes than developing the chessboard of pieces.
Right.
Dune Part 2 takes a much more granular approach to the dynamics between its characters, giving them a little bit more levity, a little more stakes between one another, and it's all the better for it. And I also do think that basically every game has been upped. And it's not like the first movie was bad in any of the production areas. I'm never going to criticize in any of those, but I do think that the spectacle is more interesting here. I think that the variety is more interesting here. I think the runtime is better used. I think that the supporting cast is given a lot more to do. I'm surprised to say, but I loved it too.
Yeah.
Dune Part 2. It's the best movie of the year.
Absolutely.
And it's going to stay that way for a while.
A long while, I presume. So, Tucker, let's get into the characters, because I would tend to agree that, yes, we get a lot more character work here. Yeah. Obviously,
even in just the first 20 minutes of this movie.
This is obviously the second part of what is essentially an entire narrative arc. Yeah. So this is where...
Dune and Dune Part 2 are two halves of the original book Dune Whole.
Yes, that's right. Dune Whole.
I love Dune Whole.
Anyway, so this is where a lot of your grander changes are going to happen, especially for characters such as Paul Atreides. So let's start there.
Yeah.
The centerpiece of Dune, Muad'Dib, Lisa Al Gaib, Paul Atreides.
Etc.
Timothee Chalamet is good in the first movie. I enjoy his performance. He's doing the sort of reserved but also boyish kind of thing that Paul Atreides needs to start out as. Here, you can feel the maturity that has settled into Timothee Chalamet as a performer, and also what necessarily needs to happen to Paul Atreides as a character, as he is becoming basically a desert freedom fighter on Arrakis, and sort of ascending to this role of this messianic and militaristic leader amongst the Fremen, and he's so fucking good in this. He just gets more room to play and show, I think, in Dune Part 2.
I mean, I disagree that he was good in the first movie.
Sure.
I was actually listening back to both our reviews on that first movie, and how Timothée Chalamet's performance was one of my biggest criticisms, and why I didn't connect to the world was because I felt like he was flubbing a lot of his lines, and he wasn't very personable. He wasn't a very interesting character. But in this film, right from the bat, you get so much more about him personality-wise, and he's in, I think, a much more of an interesting situation in that the information about him being the Messiah is spreading amongst the Fremen, and he feels out of place, but he wants to fit in so well, and so it puts him as a really interesting fish out of water that I think humanizes him a lot more, and across the length of this film, he just gets a lot more to play with in terms of small moments of intimate conversation with either his mother or Chani, and then or Gurney Halleck, and then by the end of the film, he's commanding legions and millions of
Yes.
Fremen, and that breadth I think just adds so much to what Timmy can do as a performer, and I think it's probably his best performance.
Honestly speaking, yeah, because I'm not like a huge Call Me by Your Name guy
Yeah,
either, but like he's really fucking good.
Yeah, he's good in a lot of stuff. He's great in a lot of stuff.
Let's talk about the more intimate relationships before we get into the end of the movie. And also, I don't know if we said this up top, but spoilers for Dune Part 2 as well.
It's you can't really talk about the movie without spoiling.
I mean, there's not a lot of spoilery stuff. It's just like a straightforward narrative.
Yes.
But anyway, so we get a lot more Zendaya in this. Zendaya as Chani.
Yes.
Finally, we're making true on that promise. She's also really good. I love their dynamic.
It also might be her best performance.
I love how they chose to characterize Chani as someone who doesn't believe in the sort of mythology of the Muad'Dib, the Lisa al-Gaib.
Yeah.
She doesn't believe in this, but she is initially very abrasive to the idea of Paul joining their group of Fremen. As she, this direct carryover from the end of the first movie. It picks right up from that point. And then the development of their relationship and how he proves himself to her personally and as a member of the Fremen. He's not a spy. He is very willing and adoptive of their ways. He knows their ways sort of intrinsically. That's kind of what makes him a messianic figure. But she still doesn't buy into all of that, and she pushes that away, but like embraces Paul as like a peer, as an equal, more than literally anyone else in the narrative does.
Yeah.
Certainly not Stilgar, certainly not his mother, as she takes like the worm juice and becomes crazy, and everything. And I love that dynamic.
I think it's fantastic, and I think it's the grounding part of this movie. I mean, I believe in an interview within the last couple of days, Timothee Chalamet went on record and saying the dynamic and relationship between Paul Atreides and Chani is why Dune 2 is made. It's why it's important. That's why it's as good of a movie as it is. And I think that's absolutely true, especially in that first 2/3 of the film, and that is definitely more foregrounded than in the last act.
Yeah.
I think that it's really important to give Paul someone to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is on his level. Someone that pushes back against him. And over the course of the film, I think Chani's development is what keeps you as a viewer really engaged, because you can't relate to what...
it keeps you grounded.
You can't relate to what Paul's going through, where having all this...
It's happened to everyone, I think.
It's happened to me a couple times. But Chani being confused and stressed and not quite knowing which way to let her allegiances lie, and having these deep feelings for Paul, but then having the element of non-belief being pushing back against her, or against their relationship, I think is really, really phenomenal. And I think that the best moments of Zendaya's performance are the moments where she's not saying anything, and Paul is in a situation that is being dominated in front of a ton of people, and you get a nice cutaway to her face where her brow is furrowed, and her, like, you can see in the facial muscles and the eyes that she's feeling a lot of conflict. And it's that internal conflict that is focused in on facial performances and a range of emotion that I think gives this movie so much more warmth and personality than that first movie, which was very cold and sterile and like straightforward and stoic. Chani, I think, adds a ton of that here.
Especially when, if we want to talk about the scenes that they share, I don't recall in the 2 times that I've seen first Dune in a theater, anyone laughing at the entire film.
Yeah.
There is a lot more personality, I think, levity, especially in the moments in Dune 2.
Yeah.
There are moments where they get to talk, and like, Chani's like ribbing him for being a fucking rich boy and shit like that.
Totally.
And that's like, oh shit, like
you get a little bit of that with Duncan Idaho.
You do,
to be fair.
You do,
but
like,
he's also not in as much of that movie as Chani isn't in this.
Exactly, precisely. So that's what really sort of grounds the character and gives Paul, especially, so many more dimensions in these sort of umpteen directions that he's being pulled in through prophecy and through his own desires and like his own drive for revenge. And how does he get there? Does he embrace it? Does he not embrace it? He has visions of, if he does embrace it, if he goes to the south of Arrakis and sort of embraces his role as the Lisa al-Gaib, that he will basically start a holy war and billions upon billions will be dying and there'll be a genocide across the planets and everything. And he's like, well, I don't want that, but it kind of seems like the only way to avenge my father from the Harkonnens.
And that's a really, really interesting conflict. And I think that conflict and the the conflict between politics and religion gives this film so much texture.
Yes.
And the religious element I definitely want to get to, but I think it is that texture that is permeated throughout the supporting cast, which I think every single one of them is giving so much more depth and personality and intrigue for me. In Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica, her dealing with not only her unborn daughter, like speaking to her, which is this really crazy sci-fi dynamic that I believe is not technically accurate to the books, but whatever, it's interesting. And her becoming the Reverend Mother and not knowing how she should approach the Fremen, who some of them believe and some of them don't. That's a really interesting conflict, and the way that she evolves over the course of the film to be like so distanced because she's like experiencing all realities or whatever.
Yes.
That's really fascinating. Stilgar is given so much more to do here in that he's this incredibly faithful guy and he has a little bit of levity, but he's like just trying to push people towards believing in him.
He is willing to lay down anything for the purpose of getting Paul to ascend to that position of the Lisal guy. That he is, if anyone is the hardest set in their belief, it is Stilgar, and he is willing to do anything to make sure that prophecy comes true. And Javier Bardem is also another fantastic performance.
So good.
That while that he is driven by his faith, he also has these moments where he like is talking to Paul as sort of like all right, so here's how you ride a sandworm. Hey, don't pick too big of a sandworm now.
Don't embarrass me.
Yeah. Or when the giant sandworm shows up, and this is a clip that was shown at the like Dune 2021 Get Amped for Dune Part 2 reissue. That sequence of Paul sort of walking up to the top of that dune, and then
The what now?
And the giant sandworm comes in, the biggest that they've ever seen. That entire sequence is so incredible to experience, and if you are able to experience Dune Part 2 in IMAX as we experienced it at the early fan screening event, do it, because that is really what pushed me to feel the way I feel about Dune as a cinematic experience.
No, definitely. And let's talk a little about that spectacle. Sure. I think that the fact that this movie has so much more action definitely contributes to it feeling like a more grand operatic thing. Because I think a lot of my issues with the original, with the first film, is that while there was that spectacle in terms of shot composition and literal scale, there's relatively, it's still a good amount of action in that first movie, but there's relatively less battles with characters that I care about and like trying to remember like who's where and doing what. Where I think this movie really ups its game is in that we have all the chess pieces established, we know what their goals are, and then watching a sandstorm or multiple Fremen riding sandworms or giant explosions
you get multiple
incredible weapons.
You get multiple sequences of the Fremen carrying out attacks on Harkonnen and spice harvesters.
Frankly, they never lose.
No, they're so good at it. They're so good. They're the ultimate badasses, and it's all displayed through the direction of the choreography of these sequences from Denis and the entire like stunt ensemble team, I suppose. While the first Dune is like sort of renowned for its sense of scale, and Denis has sort of like
known for scale.
Has become known for that with Arrival and then Dune and now Dune Part 2. This is all grounded to the planets. You're not getting like the giant spaceships flying through anymore. But
I actually don't know if we get almost any space shots.
But there is still the sense of driving impact in all of this, and that has to do a lot with the sound design of this film, which is incredible. From you get umpteen more explosions and umpteen more machines crashing into the ground and people firing guns. It is like just increasing tenfold from the first film.
And as I was getting to mentioning like the action, I think that the concepts for weaponry here I think are really, really great. And another, they weren't great in that first movie, but I remember, obviously I saw this much more recently, but the mines that are magnetized out of the desert and hit the spice miner, or they have these like crazy laser sniper rifles that like they go from like one mountain and just shoot through a thing, and it can't work anymore. Or just the way that they use the thumpers in sequence with riding the sandworms to coordinate things and to travel great distances across the desert. I think it feels so much more cohesive here. Between the crazy sci-fi ideas and what's going on screen.
Yeah. Talking about one aspect of this film that I want to talk about, if we want to get back to talking about the characters, because I think that's so much of what makes Dune Part 2
Absolutely.
work, is I want to talk about the Harkonnens.
Sure.
And more specifically, I want to talk about a newcomer to this film, Tucker. I want to talk about Mr. Austin Butler as Fade Routha. Because he is a relatively small presence in this film in terms of screen time. Yeah. But I think he looms large.
Oh, absolutely.
Because obviously, I was at least very much anticipating finally getting to see him on screen. And the introduction is extended. We get an extended period on Gaidi Prime, the Harkonnen planet, that is incredibly visually striking. Yeah. Perhaps one of the most innovatively conveyed images and series of images and sequences that we've gotten in like a sci-fi film in the last 10, 20 years or whatever. Yeah. It is because it's entirely in black and white, but it's not simply a stylistic choice. It is that the planet has a black sun that bathes everything in like a harsh black and white sort of contrast. And we get introduced to Fade Routha when he's like preparing for this Colosseum battle, essentially.
It's his birthday party.
It's his birthday party. And he's immediately introduced as like he's this ruthless, he's a sociopath, whatever. And that can often be like we're really trying to hype up this character to make like make sure the audience is scared of him. But they don't. It's not just all talk when it comes to Fade Routha. He is scary. Austin Butler really conveys some like something is off with this guy when he is like screaming at these weird demon guys in the Colosseum.
Yeah, and his mouth is always like a black hole.
Yeah.
I think his teeth are black.
It seems that way.
Kind of hard for me to tell, but it gives him this very intimidating look because, well, especially on Gaidi Prime, the black and white color palette is so stark in the black depth of his mouth and the pale white of his face, and then just infinity Harkonnens up into the background.
When they're like, "Here he is, Fade Routha," and they all cheer, I'm like, I gotta put earmuffs on. The sound conveys the fucking scale of everything.
Yeah, and I also like that he is much more of a foregrounded force in this film. Stellan Skarsgård in the first one and back in this one is very good as Baron Harkonnen. He has an interesting floaty demon presence, but I do think that as more of an active force in this film and having more screen time as the primary villain of Dune Part 2, it makes there feel like there's a lot more tension and a driving force behind it, because the Harkonnens were kind of a backgrounded force in the first film, and they their soldiers showed up a couple of times, but the main bad guy, which was Baron Harkonnen, was always off in the distance, and he was doing the choreography, but he wasn't like doing things. And seeing what Austin Butler can do, and seeing him freak out against people and make Dave Bautista, who was a very intimidating force in the first film, kiss his boots in this one. It makes this guy not only feel like a psychopath, they're constantly mentioning that, but feel like a real presence. And then when we have him boots on the ground fighting multiple times, I'm like, not only is the performance great, but I feel like there's so much more stakes because there's a foregrounded villain presence.
Yeah, for sure. I totally understand what you mean. So if we want to bring it back around, I know Tucker, that you mentioned that you want to talk about these sort of themes of religion. Hey, folks, did you know that Dune is maybe about religion a little bit? Just a little theme that Frank Herbert threw in there.
Dune, the book is, but I don't really think you would have been able to tell that much from the first film, which is frankly how most people are familiar with this series, with this world. Is that first film is almost entirely politics. The religious aspect of the Bene Gesserit and the prophecy that tells that Paul will become the Lisal Gabe or whatever the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yes.
I'm just getting on the terms right.
The Bene Gesserit are predicting him that he will be the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yes.
But yes.
That's what I'm talking about. That element is in the first film.
Yes.
But it is not the main driving force of that first film. It is much more about the House Atreides being on Arrakis and the conflict with the spice and all that. But in this film, the conflict is that he is going to be a Messiah or not, or who believes it and who doesn't. And I think the religious imagery of the Fremen and the fact that they have this conflict between like the younger ones who don't believe and then millions of older generations who do believe, and they have these like murals on the wall that depict things happening, and they have religious leaders that have these practices. It feels so much more lived in here, and the religious theming of this of what does it mean to be too devoted? What does it mean to have a prophecy put upon you? And can you even have friends if you are a prophet? Like, people believe you're a prophet. Are they gonna just follow you because they think you're a prophet, or because they actually like believe in you as a person? There's, I think, so much more textual imagery and thematic texture here that I think adds so much to my connection to Dune, because I'm like, that is really interesting. I've seen a lot of politics in sci-fi films. I don't know how much religion I've seen tackled through sci-fi.
So yeah, the broader theme of Frank Herbert's Dune as a novelization is a warning and condemnation of fanatical leaders. The first film tackles that from a political standpoint, strictly stuffy men in adorned generals in rooms making decisions. This is much more. This is leaning into the religious side of things. So I mean, obviously people can connect to both, but I think that there's a lot more adjustments made to the themes of Dune with this part. At least I've noticed that. I haven't read the second half of the book. I was actually saving that until after I had seen the movie this time around. But yeah, I've heard that a lot from people that, they changed this, or they expanded this, or they didn't put this in there. It seems that Denis took a lot more creative liberty in adapting this second part when it comes to religion and making Paul a messianic figure.
Yeah, but it's also where the best imagery of this film comes from, because it's the masses of the Fremen, and the fact that in that first movie we are aware of the Fremen, but we don't know actually how much of a presence or a force they are or could be. And in this film, we really see that come to fruition, not only through learning their ways, which I think is some of the best stuff that this film has to offer on a character level, of watching Paul adapt and learn the ways of the Fremen through the Sandwalks and how their culture works. But just the scale of how many people there are. I mean, there were a lot of people, like faceless people in the first Doom, mostly soldiers, but in just the hordes of civilians, Fremen civilians.
We pretty explicitly never see a group of Fremen in the first film. Until the very end, of course. But in this one, yes, you do get a lot more of that. I just love the sequences, and this gets back to things we were talking about with more fleshed out side characters here. When Zendaya as Chani and then Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, really come to butt heads with where Paul should be going. And I think that was something that was conveyed from the very last shot of the first film, which I loved, which is Lady Jessica really glaring at Chani, which I was really reminded of when I rewatched that film. It was like, oh, yes, Lady Jessica very much views Chani as like someone who is challenging her position as the guiding force for Paul. And ultimately, Lady Jessica and the prophecy and everything ends up winning out. Which at the end of the film, which I really wanted to do want to talk about. But this whole thing of Lady Jessica becoming the Reverend Mother and coming into that role and being like, who do we must target the weakest first to spread belief, and then her like telling Paul, to her going to the south of Arrakis to take in the water of life and sort of arrange for Paul to come do that as well, and sort of riling up the masses to be like, at least Al Gaib is here. We're gonna fuck shit up for the Harkonnens, and then how that translates to Paul seeing that as the only way. And that's something that is brought up a number of times. It's like, the narrow way through thing that he says that's in the trailer as well. Paul views this as the singular way to accomplish what he's been looking for. Essentially, to avenge his father, to bring peace to Arrakis, to fulfill his father's plan from the first film, to sort of like expel Harkonnens and bring peace and democracy, kind of, I guess. A very Helldiver
and
style.
lead them to paradise.
And lead them to paradise, yes. He sees that as the only way, and so he falls victim to the very fanaticism that he was sort of shirking off the whole time. Like, even he, as the messianic figure, is not strong enough to defeat the power of belief. That's what's really interesting about the themes of religion, I think, underline all of it. And
you watch him wrestle with that in a few key moments, and I think one of my favorite sections of the film is when the group of Fremen that he's with are deciding they're also going to go south, and he's like, I can't do it. I can't come with you. I've had these visions.
I know what's going to happen.
You guys know how I feel about this. But then he has another set of flashbacks or visions, and he like falls to his knees, and he's like struggling with this, and he shares a moment with Chani, and when he stands up, he realizes that regardless of the the death that he has foreseen, that this is the only way to go forward. And the unfortunate part is that the truth of that is yet to be seen.
Yeah.
How we don't know yet if in the story that Denis Villeneuve is telling with the Dune lore, how that pans out.
The Holy War,
the Holy War and the billions starving and all of that. But I think it's a very interesting conflict for Paul, because that's the kind of stakes that no other character's ever had to deal with.
Absolutely. So the last thing I want to talk about, and this is where we're really kind of getting into spoiler territory, is talking about the very end of the film. And this is full circle back to where we started with Timothée Chalamet's performance, because he's never had the opportunity to do a role like this. Yeah. When he gets up there in front of the collected tribes of Fremen, the tribal leaders, and he is fucking yelling and
he's
screaming.
Going on Braveheart.
He is going full Braveheart on this, and he's talking about he like singles out that one guy, and he's like, "I know your fucking grandma did this shit back when this planet was free," and like how he turns that room, he fully embodies and just slams like an 11 out of 10 this scene, and living up to what Paul has to be. I
expect that to stay as one of the scenes of the year, if not action cinema, if not sci-fi cinema. I mean, that was a really striking imagery. Just because there's nowhere else I can like state that I know this. That scene is also a reference to the movie A Matter of Life and Death, in which there are these the angels are looking down upon the earth, and light is streaming down through these giant circles in heaven. In the framing of this scene is that the Fremen are in this massive, like infinitely massive underground cave, and there's basically infinite of them, and light is streaming down in these circles from above, and it feels so beautifully staged, and it gives him such a moment to express an emotion and a powerfulness as a character that, obviously, as you said, Timothée Chalamet has never had. But I think that's one of the defining moments of this film. It's not about big explosions, and it's not even about politics or spice or the Harkonnens. It's about the religious themes of Dune and the mass of Dune, which is the Fremen and their belief and the way that he can manipulate that, which I think is really where the unique soul of Dune lies, in that the messianic messaging and the religious imagery, and the way that you can pair all that with many people going to religious gatherings in real life, which is one of the very few places you can draw direct correlation between Dune and the real world, because Dune's so fucking crazy.
It's high sci-fi,
But I really, really love that sequence. I think it's probably the best part of the film.
And just to sort of go towards wrapping up, I guess I'll say, is that also the knife fight with Fade Ralph is like that's kind of like the climax. It's the final confrontation between Paul and his final challenge against the Harkonnens.
And it's actually interesting that they choose that as the final conflict, which I think is a very good choice, because that does feel very distinct, especially for a film that has a set of films that have to this point been so grand, narrowing it down on
a single knife
fight with all the background sound cut out and just the like Foley of the fighting. But it's an interesting choice to foreground that, because I would say where one of my only criticisms of this movie is that the big spectacle final battle is kind of sped through. We get this whole setup of like, all right, you're gonna go here, you're gonna go around this ridge, and I'm gonna come up, and then we watch like two things happen, and then it's like, all right, we're into we've got everyone captive. I'm like, oh, that was did I blink? What the hell happened there?
So here's what I wanted to touch on this that I teased this at the beginning, is that I'm gonna hedge some criticism in compliment. This is like a compliment euro maybe. Okay, so I think that there is a bit of a challenge when it comes to pacing Dune Part 2.
Yeah, I agree.
This movie is 2 hours and 45 minutes. Yeah. Many people saying it should go to 3 hours, and potentially it should have. Yeah. Because I think there is a lot of speeding through. There's some...
It's kind of a snowballing thing. Yeah. Because the first half of this movie is so slow. It's so plotting, and I love that. I think that's actually probably my favorite part of the film, is when it is taking its time to develop these characters. But I think it's actually the cutting point. And not this scene is bad or too fast or whatever, but I think the cutting point is when we are introduced to Fade Ralph.
Oh, sure.
And then from that point, we suddenly have to deal with like 3 more things, and Gurney Halleck shows up, and we have to track what Fade Ralph is doing, and so suddenly these scenes are cutting back more and more, and for a while we kind of lose Chani. I'm like, where the hell did she go? And then we get into that final battle, and I do think that works, and it's not to the massive detriment of this film, but it is slow in that first half, and then much faster as you get to the end.
Was a little worried because we had half an hour left to do the final battle of Dune. I was like, I don't know. But I think Denis recognizes and highlights the essential points of what you need. You get to see Chani sort of cutting shit up. All right, you get to have that. You get to have the sandworms coming down and fucking dudes up. You get to see Paul sort of rolling in with his Fremen buddies and just like absolutely decimating people. Yeah. And you get to the final knife fight, which is I think where Denis sort of recognized that like you get the sort of inversion of the scene from the first film where Beast Raban, Dave Bautista sort of massacres and kicks Gurney Halleck out of there, and you get the inversion here where Gurney Halleck gets to sort of get revenge on the Beast Raban. So that's really good. I think he identifies all the essential elements. You could have made this movie 3 hours, is what I really want to say.
And I feel like they have to have that imagery somewhere, right?
I think so, because we're having some conversations about even like actors who are announced to be in this film who are not, apparently. Yeah. I'm like, the scenes had to have been cut. I mean,
Stephen McKinley Henderson and Tim Blake Nelson are both on the cast list on IMDb and Letterboxd and are not in this movie. Stephen McKinley Henderson, where'd he go? He's not in this fucking movie.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if there were some Warner Brothers executives who were like, Denis, you gotta cut this down. Yeah. You gotta cut out 15 minutes for us, Denis. Just do that for us. I just have to imagine that was the case. And with that presumed sort of oversight and editor's hand coming in, it's super well done still. I'm not saying that. Totally. The editing doesn't miss a fucking beat here. It just kind of feels like we might
The tempo just speeds up.
The tempo speeds up. That's certainly true. Yeah, exactly. And that's necessary, obviously, for making us feel like we're heading towards a certain conclusion. Maybe it's just the nature of I want to see more Dune Part 2.
Yeah. And I mean that's how I felt as well. Is the sequences that I felt where I think another one of my criticisms, I do feel like the dynamic between Chani and Paul gets very backgrounded as you reach that second half of the film. There are moments of them talking, but I feel like the pacing of their relationship happens very quickly, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, because I do like the dialogue. I think their chemistry is really, really good.
It's really good.
And like the little glimpses that they're giving one another, especially like when Paul is like looking at Chani, like her voice like fades out, and you're like, this guy.
He's not even paying attention.
It's so fucking good.
Yeah.
But we don't get almost any of their relationship in the second part of the movie, which I think is a detriment to me, because I think that is one of the best elements of the film.
But also makes sense as like Paul is getting pulled in more and more directions. He doesn't really have the time to carve out to talk to Chani specifically, I suppose. But I again, these are all things that like, yes, I wish there was more. I wish I got time to settle in these scenes a bit more. I wish I got time to see Thufir Hawat again and all this stuff. But ultimately, it's a staggering cinematic achievement that it is what it is. It fits all of its themes in. It fits all of its character moments in. It fits all the spectacle in, and manages to be so coherent and exciting and enrapturing while doing all of that.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal film. Yeah. I love the theming. I loved all the performances. I loved the imagery. I loved the score. I loved the sound design. Yeah. The production design is amazing. Like from every angle, I think it's just a phenomenal film. And for me, it really does. It gives me hope to be a Dune fan. I mean, obviously, I love one of the movies now. But I was apprehensive because I did find that first one so intimidating and like it was just pushing me away.
Sure.
But I found a lot more. The film felt a lot more inviting to me.
Gotcha.
I was welcomed into the dynamic of Paul and Chani, and learning about the Fremen grounded me so much more in this world, and the religious themes felt so much more distinct. And maybe because I'd seen that first one a few times, but the terminology wasn't as overwhelming. Sure. To me, it felt a little bit more focused. I think the villain presence feels a lot better in this one. I think the pacing is better. I think this is a phenomenal film. Yeah. And
there you have it from a Dune lover and a Dune hater. That Dune Part 2 is fucking great.
Yeah.
What do you give it out of 10?
You know what the amazing thing is, Tanner?
Okay. Sorry.
It didn't have to compete with Oppenheimer
Correct.
for Tex from last year because
Right.
it got delayed. So maybe that's one good thing that came out of those the strikes delaying things. But also, it doesn't have to compete with Avatar because
Correct.
Avatar got delayed out of this year.
It's
and so
true.
we go Oppenheimer, we go Dune Part 2, sweeping all the text, and then next year we get Avatar 3 sweeping all the text.
Oh, I love movies.
Tanner?
Yeah.
9.3 out of 10.
I'm going to go 9.5 out of 10.
Oh, you like it so much more than me.
Oh, you bastard. You
But
dumb bastard.
even as long as it was, even as much as I didn't like the first one, I'm excited to see this one
Yeah.
a couple more times and
Yeah.
really sink into it. And Tanner?
Yeah?
I bought the audiobooks for the first 3
Oh,
books
all
on my
right.
phone.
Okay.
So, I'll be getting into that.
There we go. Right on, right on. Okay. Very good, folks. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Dune, dune, digga dune, digga 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 dune. Nope. We're not going there.
Okay.
That's too far.
Thank God. Okay.